Well, it's been a big deal in many respects. It seems to have not really grabbed hold of the attention of the public yet, but earlier this week, the Western Cape Devolution Working Group was created. And we're going to be talking in just a moment with one of the people who is celebrating most as a result of it, Phil Craig from the Cape Independence Advocacy Group.
Hi, Alec. Nice to be with you again.
Well, Phil, it's good to be talking with you again. You know, I worked out the other day that it's 2 years ago now that we had our first interview. And that interview has been read by 58,000 people on BizNews. I haven't checked the other channels, but that's a heck of a lot of people interested in the subject of Cape independence. The process that you've been following, are you happy that it's all on track?
Yeah, look, we are, and I'm glad that so many people have read it. I think the local government elections last year and the ANC falling below 50% changed everybody's focus for a while, and it's been an interesting last 8 or 9 months. And I think it's a little bit of taking a bit of time, perhaps, for the mist to clear around that. But we are. I think it's now part of the let's call it the political zeitgeist. I think it's clearly established as one of the options, and I think some of the sort of more extreme conversations around it have passed away, and I think people realise it's a political option that is not going anywhere.
It was interesting to see that you were listed, the Cape Independence Advocacy Group, amongst the members of the Western Cape Devolution Working Group. Well, clearly the DA, which is the ruling party in the Western Cape, was necessary to get anything going on that front. But the fact that you're there together with the Cape Independence Party, with AfriForum, Ian Cameron's Operation Action Society, it does appear as though you're coalescing now around something pretty big.
I certainly hope so. And I think, what do they say? Desperate times call for desperate measures. I think 2024, as I say, the mists are starting to clear around 2024, and I think perhaps not publicly yet, but privately, there is now a recognition that we're not likely to get this cuddly coalition government that some people would wish. And the reality is that 2024 is going to find some version of an ANC government still in power, either the ANC itself or the ANC and a few smaller parties, or perhaps worst of all, the ANC and the EFF. And if you run the numbers, I mean, there's no possible way that we're going to end up with a coalition government that doesn't include at least one of the ANC and the EFF. And I think in those circumstances, we've got to look forward to 2024 and at very least understand that there's a distinct possibility that things will get decidedly worse in 2024 and not better. And I think whatever people may be publicly saying, I think privately that's acknowledged across the board, and people are starting to make plans, and it creates a different sense of urgency. And I'm sure that's been a major factor in now coming together to push for devolution and get a power away from that central government and towards the people where it can serve them better.
How did this all get put together?
So look, it was initially in some ways, and I'm sort of going to pick my words carefully here. It's something that we certainly had discussions with the DA about, and a number of other groups, and perhaps as a lobby group who sort of works behind the scenes and chats to a lot of people. It became clear that there was clearly a strong desire to move forward, and a desire for change, and I think it just effectively coalesced from there. There wasn't really any great formal process that started it. There was a recognition, a number of discussions that more and more people got looped in, until eventually we had this working group formed. There were other parties that we sort of also tried to get involved. Not everybody joined that was invited, but certainly we got this very, very powerful group of people that now have formed this working group, and I suspect others will follow in the weeks and months to come.
How powerful?
Well, I think I think very powerful. I think you're so. I mean, let's take this context of the Western Cape. I mean, we've got the political parties that account for about 60% of the vote, and therefore that means that they can pass provincial legislation without needing to have any permission from the ANC or the EFF, and that's quite significant in some contexts. Then obviously you've got AfriForum, you've got the Cape Independence Movement, you've got Cape Forum. There were a number of legal minds that were there. So collectively, you've got some academia and legal minds. You've got civil society, and you've got multiple political parties cooperating. I think that makes for a very, very powerful group of people who can fundamentally change the political status quo. And of course, that's the idea of the group in the first place. We decided right from the outset that this isn't a group that's going to be focused on talk. It's going to be a group that's focused on action.
Are you being accepted as a relevant voice now? Because Phil Craig and the Cape Independence Advocacy Group was out there, was not really taken that seriously by other role players.
Sure. Well, look, I think the argument of first they laugh at you is probably applicable. I understand that secession, it's one of those things that feels like quite an extreme solution, and I often describe myself as a reluctant secessionist. I get that. It isn't your first port of call. Ultimately, we have to find solutions to the problem that we're involved in, and I think there've been a few critical moments around the movement. Obviously, initially at its inception, then the riots in KZN last year were really a big wake-up call for an awful lot of people. And again, we see now we're having stage 6 load shedding, and people are starting to accept that 2024 is probably not going to be a great outcome. Then suddenly people start to look at other solutions, and clearly secession is one of them. Although I must be fair to point out to the groups, clearly this working group is about devolution. It's not, we're not here on this group to promote secession. We're here to promote devolution and to take powers away from Pretoria and deliver them to the people of the Western Cape.
So where do you draw the line between devolution and secession? When do you think, from your perspective, that other members of this group are going to start seeing it your way?
Well, yeah, and look, I'm not sure that our intention is to necessarily make them see it our way. I think clearly from this group of people, there are going to be a broad ranges of perspectives and opinions, and that perhaps is the strength. And I think if we look at some of the, let's look at the traditional way of working. We've seen the DA, for argument's sake, Alan Winde be elected in 2019 and Jordan Hill-Lewis in 2021, both of them on tickets of devolution and devolving powers. There was a big focus on policing, and we've actually seen, without being fairly blunt, that they've run into a brick wall with that. They can't deliver the policing powers. But Becky Chille's been absolutely clear that he's not going to grant policing powers to the Western Cape government or the city of Cape Town. And last week, Cyril Ramaphosa chipped in and said the same thing too. So I think that, and therefore you have to start now saying, well, how do we do that? How do we actually deliver these powers? And I think that's where that discussion starts to go on. Now, what do organisations such as ourselves do? Well, one of the things that we're pushing quite strongly is for the Western Cape to claim the right to self-determination. And we're saying that the Western Cape doesn't need to ask for permission from Becky Chille or Cyril Ramaphosa to make decisions on behalf of the people, that self-determination is a constitutional principle. It's a foundational principle of international law. And if the Western Cape people call for self-determination in the Western Cape legislature, then the South African national government will be obliged to grant self-determination under international law. It has no right, and then that could be exercised. And self-determination in international law can be exercised in 4 ways: autonomy, federalism, secession, or unification. And clearly, the working group wants one of those things, and I think we accept that. And so, in many ways, as an organisation ourselves, we've split up. Let's call it executive authority, and then the decision that's made. So at this point in time, we're saying, look, let's work together. let's get executive authority, let's get power to the people of the Western Cape to make decisions, then ultimately their elected authority in the Western Cape government is then going to execute those decisions. And at this point in time, the Western Cape government wants the devolution of power, and it wants federalism, and therefore, yeah, we support them and say, look, well, come, let's go and deliver those things. And if somewhere down the line, as a secessionist organisation, we want secession, then clearly we'll need to influence the Western Cape government at that point in time into supporting secession. But let's make a start. I think the key thing is for us not to argue about our differences and where we're going to end up. The key thing now is actually, with 2024 looming and the possibility of an ANC EFF coalition, we need to make a start, and we need to protect ourselves against the worst possible outcomes in 2024. And we need to take hands to do that. And I'm delighted, that the working group, we're going to make a start in doing those things.
You've told us enough times that the first step along the process of a referendum for people of the Western Cape to decide whether they want to secede or not is that it has to be allowed by law. Now, just explain, if you would, the process there, and has this private members bill, which has been proposed for so long, gone through Parliament yet?
No, it hasn't, and look, it's fair to say, we're quite disappointed that the DA has taken so long to bring this bill. Clearly, they haven't stuck to the time scale that they originally intended. But it was one of the key focuses of the, and you'll see from the press release that that there's a renewed focus to make sure that legislation is put in place. And the two key initial focuses of the working group are going to be the devolution of policing and putting that referendum legislation in place. Although clearly there are other purposes for referendum legislation other than just secession. And I think it allows the Western Cape government to consult the people of the Western Cape on specific issues outside of elections, which clearly have other are party political for starters. So it's an important piece of legislation. Clearly, it's a critical piece for us, and we want to see it in place. And obviously, there's been an agreement for it to be in place for some time. But everybody actually in the group wants to see that legislation in place, because it's critical to getting power away from Pretoria to the people of the province.
Well, what was the mood like at this meeting of the working group, given that there are differences, but there's also quite a lot of commonality?
It was good humoured. It was extremely cordial, and there was a real commitment of people to reach across party lines. I think we understand in many ways. I was sort of privately calling it the new CADESA, and I think that was the mood. People were saying, well, how do we help? If you do this, then we can do that. And how do we coordinate our efforts? How do we coordinate the efforts of civil society and political parties, and how do political parties work together to make changes? And then even in down to the law, some of the legal experts may have been people who some of the parties may not have consulted in the past, and that they were putting forward some very interesting and perhaps radical legal views, which maybe wouldn't normally exist in the mainstream political sphere. So, for example, on policing, one of the really interesting discussions we had is how do you balance the political force? How do you balance, the constitutional rights? Because we recognise that you have this. The Constitution empowers the national government to provide for policing, but one of the things that one of the legal experts was very keen to point out was, so well, actually, you have to balance that, and you saw in the statement with for example, 12(1)(c), which says that the national government is obliged to protect its citizens from violence. And how do you balance these two rights if the national government has abjectly failed in protecting citizens from violence, and you've got a dysfunctional what then? How do you then balance those two rights? Because clearly the provincial government and the municipal governments have an obligation to step in and protect their citizens where the national government is failing to do so. And then therefore, actually, does the national government have the constitutional right to hide behind one section of the Constitution when it's clearly failing in another section of the Constitution and creating the problem that needs to be solved? And I think these are the type of discussions that we're now getting into. And I think we're seeing an evolution of our democracy. We're going to, and I think we're setting up for a constitutional battle between the devolutionists or the decentralizers and the centralizers. I think that's probably long overdue, and I think this working group is going to be a catalyst for that, because I can promise you there's clear intent to push this through and to make a difference. This isn't going to be a talking shop. I think clearly we're going to push hard for these powers, and I think there's really good justification to protect the people of the province from the national government that's failing them.
So there are parts of the Constitution that you can argue in a court of law, perhaps even the Constitutional Court. But for the public looking on, legal issues take a heck of a long time. Is there anything around the corner that would retain the interest in your advocacy? Clearly, you want secession. Now you're getting yourself involved in a group that could be drawn out for many years before there is a decision one way or the other.
Yeah, look. I think there's a real urgency in this group to make changes before 2024. So I don't think anybody is seeing a really drawn out process. Now, obviously, they say no plan survives contact with the enemy, and clearly, not everything is within the control of the parties within the group, but there's a clear intent to make quick changes. And I think from the CIAG, from our point of view, this is clearly one string to our bow. It's not that we're going to discontinue our other efforts, but I think this is a group where we've decided to come together and put aside our differences. It doesn't really matter where we ultimately want to end up. We all want to start at the same place, and let's at least move forward and help each other to start making progress. And for argument's sake, if we can successfully get control of policing and actually, against the government's will, take power away from it, that's a precedent that actually is very, very significant for people in other provinces and regions, and for other powers, and certainly for people like ourselves who are asserting that the Western government the national government has failed us, and we didn't elect it, and actually we don't really need their authority to govern ourselves. Then taking power away from them to govern ourselves better on an issue such as policing clearly has implications beyond that.
Phil Craig from the Cape Independence Advocacy Group, and I'm Alec Hogg from BizNews.com.